Hello. In this video, I'm going to go over a mix that I made of a project that was made in collaboration with a group of colleagues, your professors in ATech, Paul Fishwick, Paul Lester, Roxanne Minish, and Extine Burrow, and myself. And we've been experimenting with recordings the past few months. This is the second one we've made. And the process is something like what is called exquisite corpse, the process where one person starts, gives it to the next person, they add something, and then the next person adds something. In this case, everyone added an audio track. So just a note or two before we start. I kind of give myself about 4 or 5 hours to mix this. There are things that I didn't do that I could have done, but I think for a quick turnaround, it came out really well. My own work, in some ways, I tend to spend way too long on the mixes. If this was my mix on my own, I probably would have obsessed over it another 12 hours or more. But most of it would be very subtle. In fact, there's already a lot of very subtle things in here that you may not notice until I point them out. So, for those of you watching and think, oh, why didn't you try this or why didn't you try that? I'm certain I would have, but I kind of give myself a little bit of a, as if this was a commercial project and you had X amount of time. So I give myself about 5 hours-ish. So let's go through this recording bit by bit. First of all, let's take a listen to the entire thing. Okay, that's the piece. It's about 2 minutes long. So this piece is, the idea is there's a backing track and there's basically a spoken word poem over the top, which is a model we might use in our class at some point. So it's fairly simple in terms of the pieces. We have this original drone from Professor Fishwick. In this track, I'm going to go through with each one of these what I did in terms of processing. So as we listen to this track, I've got really just a few adjustments on this one. The first one is this plugin here from Goodhertz called Wow Control. It kind of simulates what would happen if you recorded to tape. So with a lot of digital instruments, what I like to do is smear them a little bit in terms of pitch and time, and that's what this does. So if you play it and I turn it on and off, it's really difficult to tell. It's subtle. Here's what it's doing if I turned it up. So it's definitely warping it in terms of pitch when it's turned way up. I have it moving very slowly. This is the speed, this is the amount. So this happens if I turn it up, turn the speed up. So that's what that's doing. Again, it's simulating what would happen if you recorded to tape. So this is a digital synth, so we give it just a tiny bit of analog flavor. Then we have an EQ that's just barely rolling off. It's cutting a few frequencies here, rolling off this high end. There's some strange, really high pitch sounds here, well above the hearing range. It's probably some digital glitch or aliasing. Anyways, this part's cut a little bit because it was a little bit resonant there, and we make room for other instruments. A lot of EQing is about not adding frequencies, but it's cutting frequencies. So that's the best way to often the best way to emphasize the frequencies you're interested in a particular sound, and also to make room for other instruments, which you'll notice I do that in several places throughout this mix. So there's that frequency emphasized, and there it is turned down just a bit. So that leaves room also for the voices. Okay, and then what we have going on here is some sidechain compression, which works with the heartbeat. So sidechain compression, what happens is you listen to one sound and you use that sound to compress another track, usually to turn it down. You hear this in dance music all the time, and pop music. It's very common to do this trick. So it's very subtle here, and that's because the heartbeat sound, let's take a listen to that. This was Paul Lester's contribution. So the heartbeat sound is very low frequency. And let's look at the sound by itself here. What's going on is if you don't have subwoofers or full range headphones, you're not going to hear this. So I've got a kick drum and the heartbeat. And what I did is added the kick drum just to the first part of the heartbeat, because the heartbeat goes boom, boom, like that. So the kick drum is just in the first part. And they're playing at the same time. And they're being driven by this arpeggiator. An arpeggiator is something, as you know from our previous class, will generate notes automatically for you. And I have it set to generate notes based on the tempo, which actually is the default tempo, 120. So that's what's going on. Now back to our sidechain compressor on this main track here. Here's what's happening. So the sound from the heartbeat is coming into this compressor on this track, and it's slightly lowering this track as it plays, and that's to make the heartbeat a little bit more apparent. But we can make it more apparent so you can really hear it. So this right here is the gain reduction. That's how much it's turning down the main track. If you listen carefully, you can hear it. They're turning down the track. But if we do this, you can really hear it. So that's a real extreme version. So it's just barely turning it down and giving more emphasis to the heartbeat. Okay, so that's those two tracks working together. Let's take a listen to this sci-fi track. Now this is grouped. We haven't talked about groups yet, but you can group tracks together. And you can do a variety of things with them. One of which is when they're grouped, the entire group, you can put effects on the group in addition to the individual tracks. So the individual tracks are the droplets and the beeps. So let's listen to the droplets. So the droplets, I just softened them up a little bit with this EQ, taking off some of the high end. And some of the muddiness in the mid-range, you can hear that. So let's listen, let's listen to it with it on and then off. So it's brighter, clearer. Let's turn it off. So what it does is it emphasizes the upper frequencies, which is what we want to hear from that. We don't need to hear the lower mid-range frequencies, which are a bit more muddy and will conflict with other sounds. So we just need to hear that part. And by the way, this equalizer could be any equalizer, including the built-in Ableton ones. I just happen to be using this one from a company called Boz Digital Labs. Also, it looks cool. Okay, now the other sound is the the beeps track here. Let's take a look at that. So we get another high pitched sound. I don't have an effect on that track by itself. What I do have are these effects on the beeps and the droplets in the group. So both of these sounds go through this group and out through here. And what I have on here is a Moog filter, which is a low pass filter, which means it cuts off all the high ends and gives it some character. So these sounds are high frequency. We want those high frequency sounds. In fact, they make up all the high frequency sounds in this piece, but they're a little bright, and so I have them cut off at about, looks like 1 kilohertz or so. So let's turn that off for a second. Listen to the difference. So it definitely gives it some character. and a little bit of movement. And then I have another instance here on beeps and droplets of the WoW plugin, which I really like. So again, this is the one we used up here on the main drone track, and it's up a little bit more. The other one was at 10%, tiny bit faster. It's pretty subtle. This one actually is a little less subtle. You can hear it. It gives it some space. So both of these give it some space and some character to these digital sounds, and helps create a mood and feel for the track. Okay, so the next section is really the focus, are these two voices here. So these three tracks can be seen as the bed. This is the main drone bed, which is constant. Then you have the beeps and the droplets, which are occasional, which is another way to analyze mixes in terms, we've talked about analyzing them in terms of frequency, in terms of things being more present and closer to you or further away, and panned. But also you can think about it in terms of how often do you hear the sound. So we have a constant sound up here, we have occasional sounds here, and that sets our bed. And then on top of it, we have these two voices. This is the first voice here I recorded first and did a number of takes, and it was mostly improv. Just from a creative process standpoint, I had planned to do something else, and then I just started improvising and going back and forth using this vocal synthesizer, and eventually wrote this piece about kind of a disembodied, possibly mechanical or AI intelligence, maybe. I was imagining it kind of floating in space, kind of alone, kind of mirroring our pandemic situation. So let's listen to that by itself.
I see you. I see. I see you.
So you hear some starts and stops there, and you hear some noises. Those are all on purpose. I left all those in there. The starts and stops are for emotional effect, and the noises as if you're like in a machine or maybe in a capsule or something. And I just leave them in there. I often leave noises from cheap microphones in my recordings on purpose. The things you're supposed to cut out, I leave them in there. Like here's another one. Like that's a false start. Like I started to say something and then didn't. Anyways, there's a number of those. So what's going on this track is there's a channel EQ, which is just kind of rolling off the low end and the way up or high end. We don't need all that low end. Then I've got a compressor here, which is just barely chopping off the top ends here. And those T sounds, kind of chopping those off, smoothing those out. The main effect here is this vocal synth. This is from Isotope. And I'm not going to go through all this, but this is how I created that sound mostly. The main part is it's pitched down 3 semitones. It's got a bunch of computer-ish sounds combined in here. Some distortion, filtering, all kinds of stuff going on. I tweaked that quite a while. I really like creating vocal effects. It allows you, it's kind of like a mask. It allows you to be another character. So that's what I was doing.
There would be no before and no after.
So the other thing is about effects like that is you don't want to add them after. You want to create them and then speak through them. kind of like a lot of effects, like for instruments, for guitars and keyboards and whatever, delays especially, they're part of the sound. They're part of the instrument. And so you want to perform with them turned on, which is what I did. So then there's a gauge that actually helps emphasize some of those noises, chops them off really sharp, kind of mechanically. It's not really necessarily to get rid of the background noise, it's more to create a choppy effect. And then there's an echo to give it space.
No before and no after.
So you can play that again without the echo.
No after.
Very flat.
No then.
And with it on.
No then. No when.
And there's another one of those weird noises right there.
No when.
And if you'll notice here, this is the automation, which we'll talk about it later. This is the automation switch, turns it on and off. But this is the track panning automation. And everywhere there's a noise, I start the noise off to one side, usually to the right, and then pull it back. So the noise itself is off to the right channel and then comes in. So that's mostly where I've used panning, is just on the noises. It's pretty subtle, but
No.
you can kind of hear it there. It also plays against the echo.
I see.
You can hear that little noise is just on the left side. Anyways, very subtle little bits with panning. Okay, so that's the echo. Then we have a compressor. This is just another compressor called an iron compressor from Plug-in Alliance. It's a massive thing. Looks really great.
I see. That's something that light does.
That's how much the level's being compressed. So let's listen to what it sounds like before and after that sound. This is without it.
There would be no before and
Listen to the echo also when it's on.
there would be no before and no after.
Hear the word after, listen to the echoes. Here's without it.
No after.
Yeah, the echoes just die without this compression after it. So this compression after the echoes helps bring that level of the echoes back up. Then I just have some EQ to just take out some troublesome frequencies, and then this utility, which is super useful for low, adjusting amplitude. You can also, I increase the stereo width slightly, and that's all that is. Okay, so that's the vocal channel. And so the next channel is Professor Burroughs' vocal part. And the idea here was, after I did this one, I thought it would be really great to have another voice that's really different, that sometimes was in sync and then sometimes was not in sync. And so that's what all this cutting, chopping up is just me going in and chopping everything up and moving it around to create that effect, the doubling of the voices. One of them, my voice is panned a bit to the right. Her voice is panned a bit more to the left. And again, there's some little bit of track panning going on here. All right, so let's listen to these two voices together.
I see you. I see. I see you. That's something that light does. And no after.
So like right there is a perfect example. So because that's about time, I had her voice come in before and after this phrase here.
No before and no after. No then.
And then they're synced up again. So that's the effect that I wanted to get with the voices floating over the top of the rest of the mix. So on her voice, let's take a look here. We've got another good Hertz effect. Just some, it's basically an EQ. That's all it is. And it's just softening some of it a bit. And then I've got two de-essers. De-essers are compressors that listen for s and t sounds and reduce them. And there's a lot of them in here because she was whispering into a mic and it created a lot of those kind of effects. So if you play it,
I'm not a full-time.
see photon right there, compresses it.
I'm not a full-time. Or a full-time.
So yeah, this is one compressor, and then this is just another one from Isotope, which obviously I need to authorize. Okay. And so just one after the other to double that effect. And then we've got, this is pretty critical here. There's two pieces of this that really create this sound. One of them is this EQ where I cut out all the low end and some of the high end. So let's listen to it with it, without it.
I'm like,
Let's solo her voice.
I'm like, you like.
Okay, this is without it.
I'm like, you like, you.
So that's a lot lower without it.
I'm like, you like.
So it lets us focus on those high frequencies in the voice without all the low frequencies and creates a contrast with the other voice. Then there's another compressor trying to control those levels because they're really kind of unwieldy. And then the other part that's creating this effect is a pitch shift, which there's built-in Ableton effects you can use for pitch shifting. I'm using an Eventide pitch shifter. Eventide's a company that's been around for decades, really famous for creating pitch shifting effects in hardware units. So this is an emulation of one of their hardware units. And there's a lot of things going on here, but basically this shows that we are going up nearly one step, just like one step on the keyboard, but not quite. So it's kind of tuned in. It's also a little unstable, and that's what the movement is, and it creates some character. This is an old algorithm on purpose, which is kind of noisy and again imperfect, and I like the way it sounds. And a lot of people do. That's why we use them, because there's perfect pitch shifting and then there's imperfect. And I wanted imperfect pitch shifting that was machine-like. So here, let's listen to this section with and without these two effects.
I'm not a full-time, or a photo, or a photo, or a photo. I'm not a full-time, or a photo, or a photo.
So there you go. There's the EQ and the pitch shifting, and you get that voice.
I'm not a full-time, or a photo, or a photo.
So that's basically how that was achieved. There's also a delay here. This is a company called Valhalla, which I'm a big fan of. You should look them up. But you could use the built-in delay, of course, from Ableton. But Valhalla makes really great delays. So that's all the tracks there. There's also some sends. If you don't know what a send is, most of you do, but a send means you're sending a certain amount of signal from each track. Here, 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 and they're all going to this Valhalla vintage reverb. So there's a global reverb, and instead of using the built-in Ableton one, I use this Valhalla vintage reverb. And so everything is being sent to this reverb, or different things are being sent to it at different rates. And the big picture point why you would want to do that is to put everything in the same space. And you can send different amounts of each channel to that reverb to create that effect. So you can see every one of these is tuned. This is how much is being sent to the reverb here, here, here. So yeah, that creates an overall like space. So this piece is about space, kind of a science fiction thing. So we have this big space. All right, so that's kind of, I did create a an extra channel here for bells, but I didn't end up using that, so we're not even going to demo that. But it creates like this spacey bell sound, but it was just too much. So one of the lessons of a piece like this is you don't need that much. I don't think this needs any more than it has. These occasional droplets and beeps over this synth pad are plenty to create a bed for the piece. It's only 2 minutes long. I think if it went much longer, I might have modulated this drone, like filtered it at certain points, made it stop, something. But it only goes 2 minutes, so it's fine. If it would have gone much longer, again, we might have changed some things up. But it's basically a quick vocal piece, and we're done. Last thing, in this master channel, this is the basically my mastering plugin, which you could do with a limiter and a compressor built into Ableton. This is my another plugin alliance one, and effectively all this is doing is compressing and limiting the whole track, everything. Normally I would mix everything without this, send it out, and then bring in the 2-track master, and then run it through this mastering chain. And often I'll put some other things in the chain as well. But for the purposes here, this does a bunch of things in one box, or virtual box. And that is a walkthrough of this piece called I Might Sing Later. Hope you enjoyed it.